And we're going to talk about something, it's funny. The first few times Laura mentioned intersectionality around me, I think she just assumed I knew what she was talking about. And like a lot of people, I could guess at it, but I wasn't really 100% sure, what that whole thing was about. So I really enjoyed digging into it with this particular chapter. And so you want to talk about race this week. And I know that, some of you have a lot more experience with and a lot deeper connection to intersectionality. And Laura is really kind of an expert. So, honey, if you want to jump in at any point, you just, feel free, like
I was going to say,
as if you don't already.
Come on.
Yeah. But yeah, being a diversity and inclusion professional, she's all up on this. But this is really really good stuff. So as I've been doing with the rest of this, I do my best to see if there's anything in Scripture that supports what we're learning about. And it's funny because when I first was going over this chapter, I was thinking, yeah, probably not so much. I gotten out of the shower a couple days ago, and I remembered, the story of, Jesus and the disciples and the other dude that was casting out demons. And I thought, maybe that maybe kind of a stretch, but this also could be a little something that kind of what was in Jesus's heart is maybe a little bit of what we're talking about. So if you remember, there are a couple of times in Scripture where Jesus sends his guys out. He says, okay, go do the thing, see how you do, come back and we'll talk about it. So at one point he does this, and the disciples all come back and they're, telling stories about how they did. And this is from the book of Mark, which was the earliest of the Gospels written. And it says in chapter 9, verses 38 to 41, John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able soon afterwards to speak evil of me. Whoever is not against us is for us. For truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose the reward." So it's kind of, this is the source of one of the famous sayings that kind of sprang from the Bible: whoever's not against us is for us. So, I take a look at that and say, well, yeah, and at a certain level, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about intersectionality. It may not be somebody who looks exactly like us, but, they're tugging on the rope in the same direction we're tugging. So, let's let them, and let's all tug together. Now, when we go to look at exactly what is intersectionality, what Ijoma? Laura, Ijeoma? Yeah. What she says about intersectionality is that it's, and this is very, intersectionality is really about social justice anyway, but it is the belief that our social justice movements must consider all the intersections of identity, privilege, and oppression that people face in order to be just and effective. And over here on this little, kind of pie wheel chart, boy, there are a lot of different things that can affect our levels of privilege or challenge, our levels of ability or disability, our haves and have-nots, is one way of putting it. And, it's almost all the different ways that we can really identify ourselves, everything from, age, race, gender, physical abilities, ethnicity, things that we all have, right? And then around the outside are some things that some of us have, and some of us, it may not be, may not be a big deal. For some people, for example, over there in the lower right-hand corner in purple, military experience is just not on their chart. For me, it's a big piece of who I am. But things like education, parental status, marital status, appearance, we all have those. But they all affect us in different ways, and yet, they're all ways that that we can be privileged. I think right now, when Haley talks about Medicare for all, and when we start talking about access to healthcare, I've got 3 different kinds of healthcare I can access. Laura has put me on her healthcare at UAB, but I also qualify as a veteran to get VA healthcare, and I also qualify as a military retiree to get TRICARE. I am privileged out the yin yang when it comes to healthcare. Now, it all might be, I might end up fussing around with, the various administrators to try to get treatment the way that Laura is, may be experiencing pretty soon here, and the way that Haley is described. But in terms of just having it versus not having it, I'm kind of privileged. And of course, I also have to look at myself as being privileged in a lot of other ways as a straight, cisgender, white, male, native-born American, living in America. So it's there are a lot of different ways that things can overlap, but the flip side of that is all the people who have intersections in their challenges, or in the injustices that are done to them. So when we say, what does it mean to us? I don't know why I said why does it mean to us. What does it mean to us? Well, again, each of us has a myriad of identities, like I was talking about, our gender, class, race, sexuality, and so much more, that inform our experiences in life and our interactions with the world. As we saw when we were checking our privilege, the different hierarchies, privileges, and oppressions assigned to these identities affect our lives in many ways. And I thought this was really interesting. These privileges and oppressions do not exist in a vacuum, however, and combine with each other, compound each other, mitigate each other, and contradict each other. So, there are a lot of ways that, you may be behind the 8 ball, because of one classification, but ahead in another way. Or, as it says there, I may have this one issue, but then I have this other one that, balances it out. And so it doesn't really hurt me that much, but somebody else that has the same one issue I have, but doesn't have that advantage that I have, it's a really big deal. It's a huge problem. So when we look, and especially because we tend to look at things, our spirituality, we tend to look at it through the lens of social justice. Because of how rarely our privilege is examined, even our social justice movements will tend to focus on the most privileged and most well-represented people within those groups. And I think that this is the key to how the entire concept of intersectionality was developed. And Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the feminist movement that really got this going, wasn't it?
Yeah, but not the mainstream feminist movement. It was third wave feminists who
What do you mean when you say, because I know you guys you're all women except for Danny, but can you help us define what that means when you say third wave feminist?
Okay, so third wave feminism was essentially what is referred to typically as radical feminism, and that's usually used as a pejorative, but what it really means is getting at the root of oppression. Radical essentially means root. And so radical feminism was like, we've got to look at more than just policies that are in place that allow women to be paid less, for example. What we have to do is look at the structures of power as they coexist on a number of levels. So a third wave or radical feminism was saying things like, you can't look at the wage gap in isolation. You have to understand how the wage gap intersects with biases about race, class, the private-public split, education levels, things like that. So it was trying to look at causal issues related to gender oppression that insisted that we start looking at intersectionality, because women of color and gay women had been marginalized by the mainstream feminist movement.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that it essentially is getting at misogyny and recognizing that there is a systemic misogyny, in the same way that when we talk about going after systemic racism, that it's not just these individuals who are racists that are causing the problem. It is the inherent systemic racism. So even though we don't hear the term systemic misogyny, that's what third wave feminism has been going after. Is that right?
Yeah, and I would say more, not to say system, but systems of oppression. So for example, the
Yeah.
education system often functions as a system of oppression, but so does the home in the traditional nuclear family, and so does the economic stratification. So there are multiple overlapping systems of oppression that feed into each other and reinforce each other.
Right. So it's the system of systems.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this, the very first phrase in this, I think, is the real key, because of how rarely our privilege is examined. And, of course, there are, as I showed last week, the number one search when you pull down why privilege, right? You just type in why privilege, or when I did last week into Google, the number one suggested search is why white privilege doesn't exist, right? And then the rest of the ones that were in the screen all had to do with computer security, right? People who have privilege, especially like, say, white people who have privilege, don't even want to think about, having it. So people who are experiencing life as not being privileged, in this case, say women, right? Well, for them, I think that's a blind spot too. It's like, well, how can I think of myself as privileged? Well, if you are a straight white woman within the feminist movement, then you're privileged compared to, the women of color, or the, gay women, or, especially like gay black women, right? So it's a matter of looking at this as, oh, yeah, I'm fighting for justice, but am I fighting for justice for everybody, right? Because just because I may be happy with this much, right, am I really taking care of everybody else? And that's where we get into intersectionality in the big picture. Our government, education system, economic system, and I love this, and social systems all should consider intersectionality if they have any hope of effectively serving the public. Intersectionality helps ensure that fewer people are left behind, and this so key. Our efforts to do better for some do not make things far worse for others. It is so simple to say this is enough, and I know Haley has been fighting this fight a lot, right? It's like, well, if we can just get this much, it'll be okay. Well, yeah, okay, but then what about the other 10, 12, 15 million of us that aren't going to get a piece of that pie? It's, even within when we got the haves and the have-nots, we want all the have-nots to have. We don't want to separate them into a subset of haves and have-nots. And that to me is what intersectionality is really trying to say. And of course, just like with almost anything else, when there's a difference, there's resistance. And so Ijeoma talks about resistance to intersectionality in social justice movements. So these are things that we, as we all, work towards justice in one form or another, whether it's racial justice, economic justice, incarceration, healthcare, the economy, employment. education. I could go on and on and on. These are issues that we're going to have to deal with. And, if we want to try to keep things fair for everybody, we need to be prepared to meet these things that are going to try and slow us down. And so intersectionality itself, this is one of the people resist it because it can slow things down. In trying to make things fair for everybody, we might be, basically kind of like the Russians throwing the baby over the side of the sleigh to the wolves. It's like, well, yeah, we're going to get the rest of us out of here, but we got to toss a few babies to get there. If you guys aren't familiar with it, it's really Russian painting that shows a bunch of people in a great big sleigh that's being pulled by like four horses or 6 horses or something, and they're going through the snow. It's nighttime, and they're being chased by a pack of wolves. Well, there's somebody in the back of the sleigh has this baby wrapped up in, like swaddling clothes or whatever, and they are in the act of tossing it off the back of the sleigh to the wolves, to save the rest of them. And as grim as that is, it's commentary, and I'm not sure that the person is commentating so much on the practice of throwing, infants to wolves as the way that we sacrifice one another, to get ourselves to safety.
Not
right?
just that, but like the way we sacrifice the most vulnerable.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's not like, Mr. Able-bodied, women and children first, so I'll jump off the back. No, yeah, exactly. They sacrifice the most vulnerable person, the one person who can't defend themselves. That's the person they toss over. And in reality, they should have tossed the biggest, fattest guy over, because he would have made a meal for all the wolves, and then they would have just let the rest of the people keep going. So another reason people risk delving into the issues that intersectionality brings up within social justice movements is that it brings people face to face with their privilege. A lot of, so far I have yet to meet anybody that is really all about facing their own privilege. That really genuinely, from a place of extreme humility, is just willing to completely own up to it and lay it out there, and then just say, okay, and what can I do about it? Right? It's tough, and it's even tough for people who are socially aware and responsible and working within these movements. And I know that it's caused some rifts in some of the movements. I mean, just from the sidelines, I have seen and read some stuff about the issues that it's raised within feminism, right? Not something that, not a ball game that I've gone to bat in, but that's one of them that's really out there quite a bit. And as we look at racism, what Ijeoma talks about is that the kind of racism that's applied to Black men is not the same racism that's applied to Black women. So there's a whole lot of areas where, even people who are subjected to extreme injustice have an area of privilege, and it may be difficult to get them to A, look at it, B, own up to it, and C, say, yeah, and you know what, we need to do better for this other person that's got it even worse than I do. I thought this was interesting. Intersectionality decentralizes people who are used to being the primary focus of the movements they are part of. So, I guess it's like if I were the straight white woman who started the Now chapter in my suburb, and suddenly there are other women that don't look like me or sound like me or have the same issues that I do, or have different issues, or have additional issues, and things start moving over in that direction. My voice feels smaller. Um, I know that egos are probably as much to blame as anything else, but yeah, people that are used to being in the middle of the thing having to be on the side, it's I know that's got to be tough. And then it says, and this is really good, intersectionality forces people to interact with, listen to, and consider people they don't usually interact with, listen to, or consider. And oh my God, how valuable that is. And I'll tell you how I know. It's because I'm an alcoholic. And in AA meetings that I've gone to over the past, almost 18 years now, so many of those people are people, that normally would never, ever be in the same room for any other reason whatsoever. We don't, I mean, it's everything from, highly educated, well-to-do professionals to bums straight off the street, off the alley, all colors, all sexes, all, you name it. It is as wide a cross section of life as you can imagine. But we get in there, and I'll hear a gay black woman tell her story, and she's telling my story, and opening it up for me in a way that I haven't heard it before. So, although it can be hard, um, listening to somebody that it doesn't seem to be anything like me, my God, I can tell you how important it is, and how much juice there is in being willing to open ourselves up to people that may not look like us, that we may think are not. It's just like, well, yeah, I can't learn anything from them. You'd be surprised. I think I've told you. I don't know if I've done it in this group, but I think in the last church I talked about Elvis, the guy that was in my old home group back in Florida, and Elvis was he talked, he was generally pretty long-winded, and his mind, as we used to say about one of my old theater professors, he often went out for a walk without a leash. But when I forced myself, I was like, okay, Charles, don't check out. Don't check out. I swear to you, in almost each one of his monologues, Elvis would drop one sentence that was like mind-opening, and I'd be like, okay, that's why I came to the meeting today, was to hear that. So anyway, even though somebody's intersections may be, like Kevin Bacon away from us, there's some commonality that they will share with us that is going to be expansive. This is a real key, and I think that it makes the argument for it in and of itself. If you don't embrace intersectionality, even if you make progress for some people, you'll look around one day and realize now you've become the oppressor of somebody else. All you're doing, I mean, it's like there's that fence between the haves and the have-nots, right? And it's either you're just moving the fence or you're using intersectionality to tear it down, right? So, which people are the throwaway people? How many people can we say, yeah, they don't count? I think that's the question that intersectionality asks us to answer. And, and going back to my guy Jesus, I think his answer would be no one. We don't throw anybody away. And that goes back to the parable about the lost sheep. Yeah, sure, 100 sheep. And I got 99 of them right here. But you know what? I'm going to go find that other one. I'm going to bring it back in. Justice for all. So when we are doing the work, when we are, engaged in, and in the case of the specific focus of this book, when we're talking about race, right? Here are some helpful questions that Ijeoma put out there and said, you might want to ask yourself this when you get involved. How might race, gender, sexuality, ability, class, or sex impact this subject that we're talking about, whatever it is? is there a reason that this other person in the conversation and I are looking at this through a different lens? How how does the position and the layout of our foxhole, affect our view, right? Could the identity differences between me and the person I'm talking with about race be contributing to our differences of opinion or perspective? And boy, you could replace all kinds of things. Replace race with all kinds of different things there. Could the identity differences between me and the person I'm talking with about gender, about sexuality, about gender identity, about economics, about you you name it, almost anything we talk about, right? Is there's something, either they, me, or both of us may be privileged in ways that it's going to affect the conversation we're trying to have, or some of us may be challenged in ways that it's going to automatically affect the conversation. We're never going to get to a meeting of the minds, maybe, but maybe we can if we recognize those differences in either, level of challenge, level of privilege. Are the people in my racial justice conversations and the opinions being considered truly representing the diversity of identities that interact with the subject matter being addressed, right? Are we only talking about feminism for, straight white women, or are we talking about feminism for everybody? Are we talking about racism against, what happens with, black men when they go out in the world? Or are we also talking about, gay black women, right? Which is a whole different nut to crack. The level of prejudice that some people in the black community have against people in the LGBTQ community blows my mind, and it breaks my heart. I don't get it. I really don't understand how people who've been oppressed can become oppressors just like that. But it happens, and it happens right here in Birmingham, right? Does my scholarship of racial justice reflect the diversity of identities impacted by racial oppression? Am I listening to people whose identities and experience differ from mine? And that's, boy, right now, that's a tough one, especially when we go so far afield as to attempt to reach out to, people on the opposite side of the political divide. This one is key. Am I looking for what I don't know? As somebody who's done intelligence work, we have our known knowns, we have our known unknowns, we have our unknown knowns, things we know, but we got the data somewhere, but we just, haven't realized, where it is, what it is, or that it's important to us. And then we have the unknown unknowns, things that we don't know, and we don't know them, right? And we should always be asking ourselves, what don't I know? Instead of doing the opposite thing, which seems to be what a lot of Facebook is about these days, is what I know, right? What don't I know? That is so deeply important and so educational. Last couple things are really about opening up the space for dialogue, right? Am I shifting some focus and power away from the most privileged in the conversation? Am I making sure that the person whose voice has not been heard gets heard? I know when Laura was out in the dining room doing her meetings and training sessions with people, I get to hear her. And I noticed that she goes out of her way to find the people in the group that have like, sat in the corner and have not, haven't been either willing or able to speak up, and asks them, hey, how about you? What do you think about this? And that's something that we all need to remember to do. Now, yeah, some people are very introverted and are kind of uncomfortable, but it's amazing how much insight introverts have because they listen, right? So we need to get those people and hear their voices. And then this last one is also another piece. Do they feel safe? And Laura could talk to us a lot about, providing a safe environment, right? Am I providing a safe space for marginalized people to speak out, right? So this is the big ask, right? It's not enough for you to to personally believe in intersectionality. This is the ask. We need to start demanding intersectionality of all those who seek to join us in our social justice movements, right? We got to say, hey, this has to cover everybody. Hey, who are we leaving out? Hey, we cannot just leave them behind. We have to listen to them. We have to address their concerns. We need to take care of all of us. And that to me is the important piece. We need to take care of all of us. Isn't that really what social justice is? We need to take care of all of us. So some things to remember. And this first one, I know this probably may seem obvious, but boy, this is really a great reminder. Most people don't know what intersectionality is, and unknown words can put people on the defensive. So the minute we start talking about it, let's make sure we're all singing from the same page in the hymnal. And if we use the word, we explain it, right? This is something that I still, kind of struggle with sometimes when I either use jargon or acronyms from the military. I have to remember to explain to people what that means, right? And, a lot of people use this word like, oh, well, yeah, everybody, we all know what yeah. Let's make sure everybody knows because it makes everybody comfortable, right? And I love, there's a whole little cartoon series about the blue triangle, and it's that, talks about this particular little blue triangle, and there's some people who are prejudiced against triangles and some people who are prejudiced against stripes, So at one point, the poor little blue triangle has some of the triangles are giving it a hard time because it has stripes, and some of the stripe things are giving it a hard time because it has triangle, because it's triangle. So, but anyway, very simple explanation of what intersectionality is: the belief that oppressions are interlinked and cannot be solved alone. That's an easy one. I think most people could grasp that, and it's an easy one to remember. So, when we are being advocates for intersectionality, it's often best to start with real life examples of how it could be more intersectional. It's like, okay, so here we are right now. We could make this more intersectional by. And another thing is not how are we doing this wrong, but how can we do this better, right? Let's take this and take it in a positive direction instead of saying you're doing this wrong. Because again, that's going to immediately put people on the defensive, and people on the defensive tend to be less cooperative. Intersectionality is absolutely always important to all discussions of race, I can say this, race and social justice. Do not let other people bully you out of prioritizing it, because they will try to, and they'll try to make you feel guilty, but it's the idea that, again, we don't leave any sheep behind, or triangles or stripe things, right? Intersectionality now.